Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you the input type of text. So for example, the input is a self-closing tag, so you wouldn't have an end tag. Now the input of type text is the default type, so even if I don't specify type of text, it's gonna give me by default a type of text. So I'm still going to specify it, so you can see it's text. Now there are some attributes that are default to almost all elements, okay, right? So some of these attributes are an attribute of type. Every input element has that type. Then an attribute of name, right? Name. Now name is an attribute that names that specific input element. So I'm going to say this is type username. So the way you would use name, okay, is that when you press the submit button, then this text that you enter inside of the input, okay, will go into the back end. Okay, like wherever you are submitting the form is going to go to that submission, that we call it the backend. And then there are languages that are used in the backend, like Java or JavaScript or even Python and C++, and there's a lot of languages, C#, PHP. So those languages are going to take this data and do something with it. Now they either store it, or they either output it, or they do something. Maybe they do some verification if it's a username and a password. But the way they identify what this text is by using this username. So maybe you have multiple inputs. You have an input of password, then the name of that input would be password. So then the backend would know that, when you're writing backend code, you can check my Python videos. You'd usually do something like this in Python, where you have something like that, and here you put in the name, so username, okay, and then here you assign it to a variable, something like that. So the point is that username is this username, and it's basically the name. Now this is how you would take the data from this username inside, like the server of a web server or some other, like a web backend language, and you would store it in to some variable or into a database or something, but you'd use the name tag. That's what the name attribute is for. Then we have the ID. Anyone can have an ID, obviously. Then anyone can also have a class, but it's usually used for formatting, the ID and the class. So next you can also have a placeholder. Okay, what the placeholder does, it gives it some text. So I'm going to say enter something. Now this is going to have this text, this grayed out text on it, and when I click it, then you can see I can type in anything, and that enter something text just disappears. Now you have some other attributes also that are available with the input text type, and that's the type of autofocus. Now before I do autofocus, let me just copy this input over here, and I'm going to put autofocus on the second one. So autofocus does is this autofocus, like that. Okay, now once I refresh this, you're going to see once I refresh, the second one is automatically selected, and that's because it's autofocus. If I put autofocus on the first one and then I refresh it, you can see that the first one is autofocused. Now one thing to note is that the name, right, two input types cannot have the same name. So like username, this cannot be the same type. You have to give this a password or something, or some other name, okay, but it mustn't be the same name, because we're going to confuse the server on in the backend from where to get the data. Then we have the required attribute. Required makes something required. Okay, so if I have a button or input type submit, now just bear with me. Submit, what it does is it creates a button. of submit and I make this field required, then I cannot submit anything if this is empty. So if I click submit, it's going to give me an error message saying that, you know, fill this in. That's what required does. Then we have an input type of, or an attribute of max length. Max length just specifies the maximum number of digits you can put inside of there, or alphabets or characters, sorry, is the correct word. Okay, max length of 5. So I'm going to put that in, and this is just going to, you know, 1 2 3 4 5, and sixth one you cannot. You can hear my keyboard. I cannot enter more text inside of this. Then we have an input type or an attribute of read only. What read only does is that it just makes this read only. So read only, you cannot edit anything, you know, the value, whatever is in there is just the value. Then we have an input type of value, or sorry, not an attribute of value. Now value, whatever you entered inside of this is considered the value. So when you submit this data into the backend, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a series of name value, name value, name value, like that. So name identifies what input it's coming from, value identifies the actual data inside of that text. So I'm going to say here data value. Okay, so if I refresh this, right, and I submit, you can see, actually no, let me just do that. Submit doesn't work, something is not right. Max length 5, type text, username, press holder, enter something required, autofocus. Okay, that's fine, but why isn't this submitting? What it should do is that once I submit, then I think we made a bit of a thing. I'm just gonna do it, make it a bit simple, remove max length as well, value data. Okay, now you can see once I refresh, you can see it's automatically, what does it show? Hello. Okay, let's refresh. Okay, fine. Now once I submit this, okay, it still doesn't work. What should have happened is that this data, this word, should be showed inside of that. That's what should happen, but it's not happening. I don't know why, but the point is you can also set a value. Then you have, just like max length, you have minimum length. Okay, like it works like this. Min length is equal to maybe 3 and max length is equal to 10. You know, when you're specifying passwords, you can specify these as well. So that's what it is. Minimum length, I mean, it's quite obvious. It's gonna force you to put in a minimum length of 3 characters. And yeah, that's what it is for the input type of text.